welcome to day 3, and delighted to welcome these people who know infinitely more about F1 than I do, even though I'm wearing an F1 jacket, which, yes, small sponsor alert, it's slightly old. No.
How long have you had that in your wardrobe?
This was from the very first race. It's very dear to my heart, and it happens to be Mark's team as well. So, Crofty...
Retro is what it is.
Thank you.
And a bit slovenly.
You can see where this one's going to go this morning, can't you?
We've all smartened up. Apologies for the state of our host this morning.
I thought F1 was meant to be cool. Look at Ellie.
Yeah.
She's got the funkiest shoes of any panellist so far.
They go with my socks.
Oh, nice.
So we've got Crofty, we've got Ellie. I don't think we can call you Marky, because that sounds like a 90s rock band, and the Music Matters guys might start coming in. But yes, let's talk about F1, shall we, before we just have a kind of an old-school reunion here on stage. Before we start, I just wanted to kind of have a look around the crowd, and it's quite hard in these lights, but I would like all of us, a little poll. How many of you are avid, die-hard, watch every race F1 fans?
Oh, look, we've got 2 hands.
A few hands. How many?
What's really upsetting there?
You've got 3 options, by the way. The next one is: would you say you're a kind of a casual F1 fan? You watch the highlights, you tune in every now and then. A few more hands. And how many people never watch Formula One? You don't know what it is. You haven't noticed all that scaffolding outside. There's a lot of people who are sitting on the fence here. Come on.
Are you putting your hand up, or are you stretching?
I think that was a yawn from last. Anyway,
you had a long night last night.
I think what I was trying to do with that was just to almost set the scene that F1 is a huge global beast, a huge global property. And it has very different audience groups. There are the diehards, the casual fans, and people who really just don't consume it whatsoever. And this sport has been going through a revolutionary change in the last couple of years since a new ownership that was finalized in January 2017 with Liberty Media. And Ellie from Formula One, I'd like to start to you because 2 years ago, Chase Carey, CEO, chairman, came here and said that change is afoot. And I also know that you did a huge research study at the outset of this new management, this new regime, to try and understand what was good, what was bad, what was ugly, perhaps. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found during that study, and then what did you go on and then try and tackle?
I think one of the really important things to sort of highlight is actually before 2017, under Bernie, there was no research and no data. And so actually with Liberty Media buying the sport, we did have to start from a place of truly understanding what the landscape was. And that did start with a big behavioral semiotic kind of study to understand the landscape kind of globally. And from that, we were able to really identify perceptions, which is fantastic to know what we have to change, what people actually associate with Formula One, and therefore able to set a vision and a strategy from that. And we were able to do that across all sort of fan groups. So from your kind of super avid fan that knows everything about sort of Formula One, through to just kind of a general sports fan, through to actually not a fan at all. But what are your perceptions and associations with the sport? And there were some really interesting aspects that came out from that. And from that, we would sort of really were able to crystallize where we are today and actually where do we need to pivot the sport to in the future. And some of those perceptions that have to change was the perception that the sport was inaccessible. There was a perception around actually it was kind of very much a closed shop, despite it being one of the largest global sports on the planet. It was connected too much to the perception of money and sponsorship and having no focus on the importance of fans. And I've always come from a consumer background. And so what's kind of really, really key is you have to have a fan base and you have to center everything about serving that fan. So by being able to kind of set a vision that's ambitious, but to really focus about how do we start to serve our fans better without losing the fans you have, but very much kind of facing into the 21st century of how are we going to make the sport open, accessible, and actually start to connect with a new audience.
So give us maybe one example, because I'm sure there are many, many initiatives that you've got now in this strategy going forward that, one example of how you're trying to make it more accessible and how you're trying to do things for the fan.
I think It comes back to actually just some very, very basic principles that we hadn't had in sort of Formula One. And I think kind of Mark will attest, and also kind of Crofty, is before 2017, there wasn't a social media or a digital presence. There was a web page, but actually teams weren't encouraged to get the drivers and the teams to interact. No one was encouraged to create content or to post content. And again, if we think about that accessibility, we need to start packaging up in a way that really resonates with an audience what Formula One is about. So by opening up social media, we've been able to kind of grow that sort of following to 23 million now. We're much more sort of open, I think, to collaborating, working in partnerships that are bringing in, again, relevant media partners that can take the sport to a new audience. And alongside with kind of Sky and our commentators, I think there's a lot more collaboration of actually how do we start to do things in a way that serve the fan. So digital has been sort of a huge game changer for us, right the way through to actually introducing esports, fantasy. I mean, the list literally goes on. The momentum for us feels very, very positive because there is just so much to do. It's actually, how do you kind of focus and prioritize?
Yeah, I'm sure
the biggest challenge.
There's lots to do, and I'd love to come back to the esports thing a little bit later because I know you've commentated a few computer games as well. We're not going to get into it yet.
Esports,
I almost opened the door wide open for you to talk for half an hour, but I do want to go to Mark. On the Asian fans, and I know that the theme of the conference is access all areas, so accessibility is right on topic here. You're relatively new to Formula One and McLaren, and a fun little insight from this part of the world, and I've been here far too long, but Asian fans, they don't necessarily, when it comes to a team, for example, football teams, they don't necessarily follow the team for the team's sake. They follow it because there's a key individual who's, a star footballer, for example, and then they'll follow the team, and then they might also follow another team because they've got a star footballer who looks great on the pitch or whatever. So how are you addressing that perhaps as McLaren, or how, that may be brand new news for you, but it must be quite tricky as a team to try and build a brand and build that accessibility for the fans and build the hearts and minds with the fans in Asia?
Well, hopefully it's not new news, going back to Ellie's observation that you need to understand fans and you need to understand what motivates them, and particularly for global sports, a lot of the reasons that people pick teams or individuals has actually very little to do with core performance. When I was in the NFL, you'd have a bunch of British fans who picked teams because they liked the color red, or they liked that city because they went there on vacation. So when you're trying to build a brand, I think it goes back to you need to understand what it is fans want. And sport's pretty simple. Fans want two things. They want competition. They want to have the belief that their team, their driver, their player can do well, potentially win, and they want to be entertained. And that's essentially the formula that we as a team have to deliver to. So we're working hard at the moment to rebuild team performance, and we're getting better. We've still got a long way to go. The gap between us and those teams at the top is big, but we're shrinking it. We work really hard to get world-class young drivers who are going to help build performance, but also build appeal. You look at characters like Lando and Carlos; those are great drivers, but they're also awesome personalities.
Do you think that the people over here know them well enough? I mean, I downloaded your app this morning. I'm also, good McLaren.
We appreciate
a very nice, quick download. Full marks for that. Do you think that they know them well enough over here? And what are you doing, for example, around the race here to, allow the fans to get closer to Lando and Carlos?
So we'll do a lot on our digital social platforms, as Ellie pointed out. I still think there's a huge area of opportunity there. Started with things like the Netflix programming, which has helped open up access. We got to do more of that, and we got to do more with our partners. One of the things I love about the partnerships with media is there's a 2-hour race, but then there's a 18-hour day, and there's 6 other 18-hour days that week that we should be able to create amazing continuous content for people who want to know more about the race behind the race, or the driver rivalries, or how do teams get ready. And I think with our partners, we've started to open up that, but I think there's so much more that we can do there.
Yeah. And Crofty, you're obviously, you're the man on the street. You're there in the middle of the whole zeitgeist of what's going on the track, around the paddock and out in the stands, and you must hear the vibe of what the fans are saying and how they're responding to the new management and how they're responding to just the new style of doing things.
Yeah, it's very difficult when you talk about the fans. What are the fans? The fans are a huge, diverse population around the world who all want different things, to be honest. And I admire Liberty for the work that they've carried out in trying to identify who or what is a Formula One fan, for starters. Now, you could just say, well, the Formula One fans are those that tweet #AskCrofty on a Sunday, but they're just a very small part of this. But what I do hear a lot at the moment are people who like Formula One but don't watch it very often, who say, that Netflix documentary, that was brilliant. That just brought everything alive for me, which was superb, because that's what it was intended to do, I think, and has pushed people towards our programming on Sky Sports F1 and towards the social media content that Liberty and McLaren are producing as well, and the rest of the teams. But each fan wants something different out of Formula One. What I think I've come to know and understand more is that wherever you go in the world, there is a genuine affection for Formula One. People don't hate Formula One. Yes, some think it's inaccessible, think it's about money. But we all like, let's be honest here, we all like speed. We drive a car. When we get a chance to put our foot down on the open road, we do it. And why do we do that? Well, we like the sensation of speed. So therefore, we like watching these 20 gladiators that go out on a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday evening here in Singapore to go and battle at high speed. It's daring, it's thrilling, it's slightly dangerous as well. And we love that. And there is a genuine affection that comes through that. So the thing that I think is beautiful about the way Formula One is transforming the customer experience is that we're allowing that affection to then get closer to the heroes, both on the track and off it, of a Sunday afternoon. And that's kind of what I'm picking up from people at the moment.
And there's another audience segment, as we've established already earlier today, which is probably the toughest one to get, which is the non-F1 fan, or the one who's the fence sitter. And I would probably put myself honestly in that category. You know, I'm someone, I wouldn't watch the full race. I would watch some highlights. I'd watch clips. I'd listen to interviews, that sort of thing. But I would need, and I'm going to all three evenings of the race. So okay, I'm converted and it's on my doorstep. But surely that the man on the street, the woman on the street, surely they're the toughest nut to crack. And especially the young guys and girls who are out there, the millennials, the Gen Zs, they're the ones who would never, ever conceive sitting through a 2-hour broadcast. They want a 20-second instant bite.
Do they? Why do you say that?
I've got kids, I watch them.
That's really patronising to people, isn't it?
I've seen
No, I'm not getting nasty,
Yeah.
but isn't that really patronising to millennials and to audiences in general? You're saying they won't sit through a full race. Why?
Because
build it and they will come. If it's exciting enough, if the sport is stimulating enough, why wouldn't they sit down and watch it and enjoy it?
I think where I want to go is really that they're tough. They're a tough nut to
Yes,
crack.
they are.
So
It's
how
not
are you going to? I'm going to point this away from you for a moment, Mark, Ellie. How are you going to tackle those guys? Tough audience here. It's a good panel, loving this. How are you going to target those guys and girls who have never even consumed the sport? They don't know what it's about. What are you going to do? What are the initiatives?
First of all, I think it's really interesting to sort of highlight, and again, it is a misconception with the sport, but the volume of new fans coming to F1 is predominantly sub 34, and that has been, I think, a great sort of achievement, and clearly there's way more that we need to do. But key to, I think, what we've highlighted earlier is the entertainment aspect. And for me, it is about actually sort of moving and pivoting what Formula One has perceptions of in the past, which is sort of a commercial rights holder of a sport, and actually building up a media and entertainment brand without losing the soul of what Formula One is about. And I think the way that we do that, I think Singapore is a superb example, actually, of pulling together entertainment and action on track. Often, when we go into kind of new markets like Vietnam, we're going to have an even greater entertainment pool to start to get people physically to the track. I think other examples that have been very successful for us to date has actually been looking at media partnerships. So the Netflix series has been phenomenally successful. It's where people are. For that audience, they are consuming content there. It's doing, identifying where there are opportunities to bring in sort of celebrities and influencers that will resonate with that audience, and actually to create a format or a content that they're going to find exciting.
Off the top of your head, do you know how many people watch that Netflix series?
Netflix don't like to share data. However, what we absolutely know is from kind of tracking search, our organic search at the start of the season was up 17% globally. And I think Netflix was a huge contributor to that. Specifically in the United States, it was up 104%.
Wow,
I want to go back to your question on the sort of, will they pay attention or not? I think the difference now is that age group is more demanding. So if they go to a race, they will not accept not having good food. They won't accept not having a choice. They won't accept getting locked in the car park for 2 hours after a race while they let the pedestrians out. So at the executional level, you've got to deliver convenience. And similarly in media, they don't just want to watch it on TV. They want to follow it digitally on their phones. They want to chat with other people that are watching the race, or if not, tell people to come and watch the race. And so they want variety and versatility of platforms. And so will they watch for 3 hours? Absolutely, but only if you give them the opportunity to watch and engage in the way that suits them.
It was really interesting. In Monza, we introduced some extra programming over the weekend. We were on air in the UK continuously from like 9:30 on the Friday all the way through till 6 o'clock at night, and similarly on Saturday as well. One of the shows that we put in, because what do we do with the extra content? How do we fill the gaps in between racing? We did an Ask Crofty special. So we had half an hour of myself and Nico Rosberg in the paddock answering Twitter questions, which you might think is the world's worst programming idea. And I have to say, I wasn't hugely convinced that it would be that popular, but I'll give anything a go. It turned into the third most watched program on Sky Sports F1 that weekend.
Why?
So,
why?
Because we were interacting with the fans. Because the fans were watching, and I'm saying, right, send your tweets in, #AskCrofty, and they're literally coming through on my phone, and I'm reading them out, including the one that said, "Do you like your nickname Brittany, Nico?" Which apparently he doesn't. I don't know why. It's a great nickname.
That is where we have to kind of get to, because coming back to the accessibility point, being able to actually create content like that, it is giving people a authentic behind the scenes as to what happens within this sport. It's shrouded in mystique, and from my perspective, we have to hold on to elements of that because there is a glamour associated with it. It is aspirational, but that's exactly what fans want. You want to be hooked in with the kind of characters, the personality, what's the gossip going on. And that's how you start to pull them in, start to build up interest, and then there's the opportunity to kind of build knowledge. To really understand the sport, and that's when it gets exciting.
And it's one of the things we try and do in our practice session coverage, which I hope you get on Fox Sports out in Asia. Every time the car's on the track, we're in a commentary box. So we try and create a program around practice, which, let's face it, no other sport televises practice sessions, maybe the NFL, as much as Formula One does, and tries to make a program out of it. It's cars going round and round a track, and half the time, the teams haven't got a clue why they're doing it, and we certainly haven't got a clue why they're doing it. So we create a discussion platform within the context of a practice session commentary where fans can interact as well, and where we can talk about the latest speculation. And it works, and it garners a really loyal audience. Then when something happens, obviously we talk about that and we put it into context for the weekend. But I think it's really important that we do this, because if you want to invest your time and be that super fan, we'll provide that for you. If you haven't got time to be the super fan, well, there's a half an hour roundup show on a Friday that will tell you everything that's happened that day. And we do a similar thing on a Thursday with a preview show as well. So we at Sky Sports cater for the differing needs of the fans, and then we're well aware that on a Sunday, people tune in hour and a half before the race, sometimes 40 minutes before the race, sometimes 5 minutes before the race. And we reset our programming at every stage to cater for those that are kind of chipping in and joining at different locations.
Is all this extra connectivity and content and interactivity, are you having to, for all of you, are you having to dial up the staff that you've got, the team that are there on site at the track or beforehand or off season or whatever? What have you done to try and match that demand?
Well, in terms of what have we
been there,
Sky?
With the previous management and BBC as well as Sky, so has it changed?
I joined F1 in 2006, and actually nobody covered the practice sessions before that season. We were the first people to do it on BBC Radio, and then it suddenly caught on. But we at the BBC, and then when Sky got the rights, they took on that mantra that it's important to be on air every single time the cars are on the track. It's important to be on air for a preview, to have a review show as well, and also to have an entertainment platform. Because in tandem with what Liberty are doing, we try with the F1 show to bring the entertainment side out. Now that's difficult because we're here to produce sports content, and to do a proper entertainment program, you need an entertainment production team for that, which we haven't got, to be honest. There isn't the staff on site to do that, but we try and engage the drivers. And I think it's important, and I think it will become more and more important in years to come with a closer association with Liberty, that entertainment show comes out, because people want to see their heroes as normal people.
And Ellie, you must have dialed up as well. I mean, it was previously a multi-billion-dollar cottage industry, basically, with hardly anyone in the office. You must have legions of people pumping out content, and Mark yourself probably as well.
We've definitely expanded from a sort of personnel perspective, because prior to sort of Liberty Media, actually there was no research, no analysis department, no strategy department, no marketing department, no comms department, no digital department. So we've had, from a Liberty perspective, sort of huge investment at actually getting the right skill set in, and starting to build up also, what does our technology stack look like? What do the systems look like that we need in order to start to sort of communicate in a way that fans want to kind of hear from us? So there's been a big change.
And Mark?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the history to know whether we've staffed up or not, I would presume. So what we're definitely doing now is staffing differently. Yeah. So you need to have consumer-facing people, you need to have digital and content specialist, comms specialists. You need to have, even in your sponsorship arrangements now, it's all about partnership integration. It's about content development with your partners. And so the skill set is a fundamentally different skill set, I think, than it used to be. And I'm sure if Zach was here, he'd tell me that, we're definitely employing more people than we used to.
In one of the other tracks at All That Matters, Sports Matters track, but in the other venue, some of the gaming folks were also then talking about how they were trying to convert their super fans into influencers. So you're kind of talking almost like a funnel approach, where you've got the casual going to the avid, going to becoming a super fan, and then an influencer. Are you using any of those folks around the region? Is there anyone in Singapore that you're kind of using as someone as a spokesperson for the McLaren brand, for example, yet? Or?
We are not at the moment. I think that's something we're definitely looking at for next year. I think what we are doing, though, is we're looking actually not at super fans to be influencers. We're actually looking at much more casual fans to be influencers, to help bridge the gap for new fans. Because I don't think the issue for us is deepening the engagement of avids. I think we can do a better job there. Right. But the real job is, how do you bring in those people around the world who want to be part of something exciting, globally stimulating, and relevant. And so you want people who are kind of coming on that journey with you.
Yeah. So those are people who are, it's almost like trying to put one of the drivers as the influencer here in town. And yes, they'll do a job, but the gap is too big between the casual fan and that person who's, a foaming at the mouth McLaren.
One of the things I think is interesting, at least from our perspective, is having other sports athletes come and participate and join and share. So I think a couple of weeks ago, Jimmy Walker was there with us, and David Beckham's been around. And that way, I think you get sort of, first of all, the appeal of athlete to athlete. You get the cross-fertilization of sports, which I think is really important. And I think you raise the profile of our sport as being appealing to superb athletes in other sports, which gives you a sort of uniqueness, which I think is
I think that's really sort of valid point, because from that, the Formula One drivers have an affinity. And I think one of the sort of hidden things about the sport is actually just how phenomenal they are as human beings and athletes. And I think it's often a misnomer that they sit in a car and they kind of drive around. But they are having forces on their body that none of us would be able to kind of comprehend. So you go around a corner and, you hear sort of 5G or 6G. What does that actually mean? But like your head weighs 46 kilos. And they're doing that for sort of 2 hours, or the intensity of being here. I mean, they are incredible. So bringing in athletes that are going to share that affinity and actually create really interesting kind of content from that. And I think the other sort of lenses for us on the entertainment side is then through the lens of music, fashion, film, TV sort of entertainment. And that's where, again, I think it's just taking the sport out to an entirely new audience, where that hasn't happened. I think a great example last year with Sky was like getting the cast of Riviera in. And that provides us, again, another opportunity to deepen a partnership already with a broadcaster, but again, take it into the entertainment sphere of Sky. Or, with the sort of hosting that you will do of sort of celebrities coming in. Hot Laps, I think, is brilliant.
And I think, as an example, we were chatting with our drivers the other day about coming to Singapore. Right now, if you're a business traveler, you can get on a flight, fly 13 hours, go to a meeting, and you can kind of be average in a meeting and get away with it.
You're doing really well there.
Yeah, so far. But for a driver, you're going to make that trip, and if you are not at your ultimate best,
there's consequences.
There's consequences to that.
We opened up our programming last year in Singapore for Welcome to the Weekend. Show we did on a Thursday. Weekend starts on a Thursday in Formula One. And I sat there on the set and I had 6-litre bottles filled with water next to me. And Rachel Brooks, our presenter, welcomed people along and then said, Crofty, what's this? I said, this is the amount of sweat that a driver will lose during the 2 hours of a race here in Singapore. And a little visual like that suddenly put the stinking sweat box that is the Singapore Grand Prix into total context for those watching back at home. Because, we don't sweat much in the UK. There's no need. The sun rarely comes out, to be fair. But you do sweat a lot on the equator. And people they can't get a realization as to what it's like for the drivers. So we have to try and help them a little bit. In terms of the G-forces, on your head's exposed to, your neck's exposed to. I don't know if anyone's got a dog, average-sized dog. Right, lie down, stick the dog on your head and try and lift your head. Right, that's what it's like going through some corners at 4.5 G, for 5 or 6 seconds, to see if you can actually resist the dog's pressure on that one. Just little tips to help you enjoy F1.
Can you put this into your weekend's programming, please?
Oh, we often
I'll lend you my Labrador, and I want to see that Labrador on your head.
Yeah, we could do that, not a problem. Does it bite?
No, he's an old police dog. He's very soft. He's 13 years old. He'll just lick you to death.
And then we'll have 6 bottles of dog sweat.
I'd also, I want to come back to esports, I said we would, and obviously this is another way that you're trying to, I would assume, use this as a strategy to find another audience. Are you, and all of you are doing it, you've got Project Shadow and other things, and you've voiced the games, as I know, not that I've played them.
10 years now, it's amazing.
Wow. the royalties must be piling up. So
My son found a copy of F1 2012 the other day, bought it for 99p, and he proudly said to me, "I've now completed the collection." So I thought you had it anyway. Yeah, no, I lost 2012, Dad. I've now got them all.
Did he ask you to sign it?
No, and they fast forward the bits that I'm on as well. They're brutal.
Anyway, back on track.
Sorry.
So, are you working out, have you established through data or gut feel or anything that esports audience, they are then now translating into becoming an pure F1 fan or a pure McLaren fan or a pure Sky fan for that matter?
What is fantastic about esports is Formula One is not an easy sport to get into. So, Mark has the experience of the NFL. Like, if you're a kid growing up, it's easy to be playing football. We don't have that with Formula One. And so what esports does do is actually give us a platform where it's very, very easy to start to merge the sort of physical and the virtual world, and to actually allow people to start to experience what is it like to drive an F1 car with the setup. And actually through the accessibility of the kind of video games and esports, it is bringing in an entirely different audience. And things that sort of make me smile is then you sort of, the first champion of the Formula One esports in 2017, young guy, Brendan Lee, 18 years old, worked in a kitchen in a UK restaurant and stuff. He then went on to beat a Formula E race driver in a race of champions, having started in esports. And that, for me, starts to completely change how we should be looking at the future of the sport and actually what are driver sort of development programs. And I'm sure with all the work that you do, the drivers spend an awful lot of time in simulators and actually kind of gaming to kind of switch off from the physical race.
I think Lando spends most of his time doing that. It's definitely part of building the fan base, but it goes back to that point of you've got to be where fans want to be.
Sure.
And if
you've got to
young
fish
people
where the fish
today
are
playing video games, and then you need to be in that world, and you need to be in there in a way that's appealing, exciting, and part of what you represent.
Without being too controversial, though, as we're at a stage in Formula One's history where we're starting to rewrite the rule book and think of 2021 with new regulations coming through, isn't that a great opportunity at some stage to marry the world of esports and real-life F1 racing? Could we not put our esports champions into an F1 car, at least for a practice session, and actually get them to drive around the track and show fans back at home, right, this could be a way, forget the traditional route through karting and the junior formula, but this is a way into Formula One in the future, because the technology is there to make it so realistic while you're operating these sims. And Brendan Lee, as you mentioned, I have so much admiration for that young man. He's shed about 3 stone. He's become a double world champion. His first trip abroad ever was to Abu Dhabi for the finals of the year that he won, and he's now a complete god in the esports world. All the rest of the gamers look up to him, which is a bit odd because he's about that big.
I thought for a moment you were suggesting putting a gamer in a real car.
Yes, I am.
Yep. That sounds like a car wreck waiting to happen.
No,
I know this may be wonderful TV for Sky, but surely that's like watching the skiers wipe out on Ski Sunday. And it's a very British reference there.
Because these guys are so good that they could handle it. Now, some of them might be too tall to fit into the chassis. I don't know. But wouldn't it be great to try and get the teams and the sport to cooperate and allow, at least for one session, end of the season, Abu Dhabi, if you've got the finals taking place, not this year, next year, well, let's have a session on track where the e-gamers get out there and show what they can do in a real-life car.
Ellie,
because
what do you reckon?
That then becomes an amazing message to send out to young people everywhere.
What do you reckon, Ellie?
Never say never. I mean, whether it's next year or a few years down the line, I think the key thing that sort of Crofty's highlighting is people need to come into the sport in a different way. And the traditional path to Formula One has been always within a physical space. Karting, then you choose single seater and you kind of go up.
Yep.
That doesn't have to be the way of the future. And I think actually the more that the esports platform develops, the more that can be made to feel physically realistic, the more time that the esports drivers then actually spend with the teams in the kind of simulators, you are recreating the environment that a Formula One driver is in. So I do think that actually we should just be very, very open as to how the future looks. I think interestingly, what I'd love to sort of almost get to one day is the ability for esports drivers to be racing at the same time as the sort of drivers on track. Now with that, I'm sure will come lots of kind of rules and regs that if a esports driver crash into the physical driver, does something happen, or vice versa. Yep. So we need to go some way with the tech, but that for me then starts to become a really interesting platform and a way to bring the worlds even closer together.
But I think, Crofty, your point, I think, is exactly right, which is what an exciting space to be in, where we get the opportunity to reshape the way that Formula One looks and redefine how teams are going to compete. Correct. Within that, with a global platform already built. It's like being in a startup with a massive amount of resource and support behind it.
Do you genuinely feel it? That's what
absolutely.
It feels like. It feels like a blank piece of paper. We can start all over again, forget the history, let's just rewrite the copybook.
No. Don't forget the history. Don't ever forget the history. Okay. You've got to hold on to your roots and know where you've come from to be able to look to the future with any sense of purpose. But next year, Formula One celebrates 70th anniversary of the Formula One World Championship, 13th of May next year. It's also Stevie Wonder's 70th birthday. So anything that was born on the same day as Stevie Wonder is always going to be good, as far as I'm concerned. But we celebrate as the pinnacle of motorsport. You know, with problems, every sport has its problems, but do you know what? There's many motorsports would love to have the problems that F1's got and still be as popular. We reach so many hundreds of millions of people around the world, but there is always the potential to do more. And is it time for the sport to reinvent itself? Probably not on a Sunday afternoon, because for me, Grand Prix racing and the way we go Grand Prix racing should remain sacrosanct, in the same way that Test match cricket has remained a 5-day game and sacrosanct.
Under pressure, but...
Under pressure, yes, but how has cricket allowed new audiences to consume that sport? It brought back T20 so that youngsters can get involved and casual fans can enjoy a condensed version. We could do that in Formula One. There's no reason why we can't have some sprint races on a Saturday afternoon, reverse grids, action-packed excitement that is separate to the World Championship on a Sunday. Mm-hmm. You know, we have that ability to rewrite the way we go racing. And I personally hope that we do look at that really, really seriously and put aside vested interests that each and every team has got for the good of the sport in the future, because we will all benefit as a collective together. The strength of the wolf pack is that it sticks together, and Formula One needs to remember that sometimes, but that's a totally different story.
Love that, the wolf pack image. But do you feel, and we've got about just under 10 minutes now, and maybe one or two questions, and then I'm happy to throw this to the floor. There's going to be a microphone going around, so start thinking of some questions, but maybe just one or two last questions from me. And I love heritage. I'm wearing a 10-year-old McLaren jacket, for crying out loud.
You can buy a new one this weekend.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Very reasonable, 20% staff discount.
There we go. You've got a +1 audience, and that's what I wanted to ask was, are you finding genuinely that audiences are growing? Because I remember a few years ago there was, criticism, there was declining TV figures. You've now got more races, so that helps bolster the traditional live broadcast, the kind of cumulative audience across the year. And my friends at Nielsen Sports have happily given me some data that shows that traditional TV audiences are quite steady, which is great that it's recovered. Are you finding that the other channels, the esports, the F1 TV, obviously Netflix we talked about, are you finding that they're taking that and adding even more to the top, or is it replacement? Is it cannibalization, or what?
I think coming back actually to something Mark said earlier, it's looking at devices and how actually viewers want to kind of access it. So when we look at all of our sort of numbers, when we look at these sort of first 10 races on a cumulative basis, it's up 4% to where it was last year. Okay. And for me, what's very interesting, specifically actually within the Asia region, is it's one of the regions we see where access via digital is pretty much on an equal level with access via TV. Now, Now, in the rest of the world, that's a very different picture because TV is still the kind of predominant sort of platform.
Yep.
But that is changing. So we see those numbers kind of going up, race attendance going up, and I think that's clearly as a result of more people engaging with the content and being brought into the world of F1 and seeing that there's a far better balance of entertainment and sport when you're at the kind of track. So for us, actually, the more that we have expanded the access points for fan, now we're seeing that positive momentum translate into the kind of metrics that we as a business will
Can you give us a number on, I mean, F1 TV, relatively new product. How many people have you got subscribing to that now, roughly?
We are pretty much in the sort of 500,000 sort of space.
So there's another 500,000 you've suddenly got who maybe not would
that
consume
varies.
elsewhere.
And I think one of the really sort of interesting things is changing very much the way that you sort of approach things. So historically, I think you would never kind of launch anything until it was absolutely sort of 100%. And it's for us, it's been shifting from actually if we need to kind of move at pace. So we should be actually adopting how startups and tech companies do things, and that is very much a sort of test and learn basis. So you're constantly in beta, constantly taking that insight from fans. How are they using it? What do they want kind of change? And we evolve that sort of product and we update that as we go along. And so we've been on sort of huge journey of learning with that, but now the sort of product is working well. We're able to keep Crofty's commentary on there, but it's starting to kind of change the sort of interface. The fact that you can actually have 27 live streams, it's available now in 66 countries. There is kind of progress there, and to have that from a standing start in 2017 is kind of not bad progress.
Awesome, that's awesome.
It's also, with the increase in social media content, that drives audiences to the live broadcast as well. So McLaren are having a good start. You know, Lando hasn't lost any places this week at the start, which is nice. You know, 22 places lost on the opening lap this year, but he gained 6 in Spa. That's not a problem. So we'll go back to Spa. Lando had a great start. People are being fed that information through McLaren's social media channels, through F1, through us at Sky Sports as well. They're keeping up to date with the race. They might be out and about. They'll log on to F1 TV in this part of the world. They'll put their Sky Go on in the UK, because you can watch it digitally through Sky in the UK. And then they'll get back home and they'll watch the last half an hour of the race. Now, the way that television is consumed and the difference between now and 10 years ago, people have that opportunity wherever they are in their daily life to watch live sport. So you need that social media content generation to warn people that you've got to watch this is amazing. And then when they do get home, bang, on goes the television, and they're with us. And we see that in our audience figures at Sky, which are superbly plateau, which is fantastic. We don't lose a huge amount of people through the race. We've got a very loyal audience, but you see it getting up and up and up towards the end of the finish.
I've got to be your producer.
And tell me to shut up. You've got 3 minutes.
There we go. Someone has to, unfortunately, because I promised that we would pass a microphone around. If anyone in the audience has a question for any of our guys,
I'd like to know where Ellie.
There we go. One in the middle.
Done.
Go, Ed.
Like a professional set done.
Oh yeah.
Very impressive.
Hi. So I'm a student from Singapore American School, and so going back to gaining new fan base. The world is becoming more interconnected nowadays. So when it comes to like marketing in countries with different cultural backgrounds, what are some things that you guys are considering? So, for example, in Korea, in terms of football, back in the days, Ji-sung Park, he played for Manchester United, which is why a lot of the majority of the Korean population supported Manchester United. And these days, Son Heung-min, he plays for Tottenham, which is why a lot of Korean people support Tottenham. So, would you guys, I don't know, maybe change the way you guys recruit people to make that emotional connection with new fan base with different cultural backgrounds? or what are some strategies you guys might implement to approach to new fan
So
base?
if McLaren had a Korean driver, then Korea would root for McLaren, is that?
Yes, and that's what I was saying earlier, basically, that they follow because of the driver usually. They'll support the team because of a driver. Good question.
That is one of the biggest missed opportunities in Formula One in the current generation. We raced in Korea and we lost out on that race. It's a shame because Mokpo was a great track. We have been to China for how many years now? There is no Chinese driver in Formula One. Are you telling me there's no one good enough in China to race in Formula One? Rubbish. Of course there is. But we as a sport, or the promoter of the race, need to find and identify that talent and give them the opportunity to compete for a space amongst the top elite. There's only 20 seats out there, but I think it's a crying shame that as a world championship, we are not tapping into some of the new markets to find the talent that is out there. Malaysia as well. There's not. We lost out on Malaysia, but we should have gone there. And I don't know what you guys think on this, but I think it's a crying shame.
From my perspective, the easiest and best thing would be if I could have a driver from every nationality. It would make my job a whole heap easier.
Full grid.
I think it's a really valid point that you raise, and certainly from a FIA, who's the sort of governing body of the sport, and from a Formula One perspective, the teams as well do it, is identifying where the talent is coming from and supporting them actually through their sort of development. So we've got a Chinese driver in Formula 2, Chinese driver in kind of Formula 3. So that sort of path is coming. What's then sort of our job to do is to really start to elevate them and to make a local connection. And we did a fan festival in China actually earlier on in the year, and it was phenomenal to have him there and to interact with the local fan base and actually just get more people into the city centre of Shanghai to connect with what is actually happening. And then on the sort of other side of that is really identifying who are those kind of micro influencers through the lenses that fans actually care about, and how can we bring them in and to give them an experience that they haven't had before to really start to resonate.
Yeah, I think you make a really interesting point, because if you think about the players that you referenced, soccer players, two of the greatest soccer players in the world, right? So they didn't make those teams because they were Korean and they wanted to grow a Korean fan base. They made those teams because they're the best soccer players in the world, and they made the teams. And I think our challenge, and I think it's a very fair one, is I think the teams collectively, individually, and with FOM could do a way better job of thinking through how do you nurture and develop global talent. And I go to Crofty's point, there's a lot of different ways to bring great athletes into the sport now. You don't have to start by go-karting when you're 5 years old and grow up. And I think that's the challenge that we should take on, is ultimately there's only 2 slots, but how across the 20 teams do we do a way better job of finding that global talent?
The nuclear clock has gone red on me here.
Well, it doesn't matter. We've got another question at the back.
But I haven't got anyone waiting in the wings asking us to pull off.
Ben, until they drag us off the stage,
let's keep going. Have we got one more?
We've got 2 more.
Excellent. Keep going.
Okay, thank you. So you had the Indian Grand Prix for 3 years, and next year we're going to have the first Vietnamese Grand Prix. And F1 being the most glamorous sport in the world, I think generally agreed. There's usually a section of people, and I think Lewis Hamilton has also weighed in on this in the past, who are kind of critical of the glamour and riches of Formula One when they contrast with the economic development or the path of development in these nations. So I'm very interested, also as a fan from India for many years, what's your response to that?
From a Formula One perspective, we need to take a responsibility and to work hand in hand with the sort of promoter at a local level. I think we're in a fortunate position where essentially we've got more interest than we have racing slots. And then it's actually how do we work through to make sure that we're leaving a positive legacy within that sort of country until we're back on the sort of following year. And for me, there are kind of key things. I think we have a great program, for example, Formula One in schools. schools. So we're actually kind of looking much more at STEM and education. And for many of the countries where we race now, it's being able to shine a spotlight on that sort of country. How can we help to impact tourism, increase kind of local jobs, and to essentially attract audiences into those kind of markets. So key question for me always is truly understanding from a local country perspective, what does Formula One mean to you, and actually what is the legacy that we need to be working with you on? Is it through the lens of tourism? Is it what can we do within education? That's what we need to understand. And then I think to kind of Mark's point about how they approach partnerships now, is then putting the right things in place that we can deliver back on that. And that will vary from country to country.
Quickly, Crofty, the shepherd's crook is about to pull us off stage.
It's sad that the legacy of the Indian Grand Prix is that when you go to the track now, there's still a sign up pointing you towards the international media parking that doesn't exist. We should still be racing in India. There are various reasons why we're not. The fact that F1 is not classified as a sport in India and it's entertainment is one of the biggest reasons, and you can ask the Indian government about their taxation policy on that one. But don't forget the economic impact that Formula One has for every single country that it races in. It creates prosperity, it creates jobs, it creates a tourism boom as well. As Ellie mentioned, race attendees are up quite significantly. So yes, it is glamorous and there's a lot of money invested in Formula One, but it brings a lot of money into the local area as well. And certainly that Greater Noida area benefited by having that Formula One track there and the race being placed.
Awesome. Guys, we're getting the signal now. Can you please put your hands together for Crofty, Ellie, and Marky? And before we go, can we do a selfie? Very millennial.
Selfie.
Here we go. 3, 2, 1. There we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.